Hello. Hi everyone. Welcome to Guiding Voice podcast series. The Guiding Voice for a better future. This podcast is to help students and young professionals shape their careers. Thank you for tuning in. This is your host Naveen and I am with my co-host Sudhakar. Dear listeners, in this episode, we want to dwell on a critical topic, information security. To discuss the topic, we have Vamsi with us today.
Vamsi is currently the regional CTO and Director of Sales Engineering for India and SAARC region. He is currently with McAfee and is based out of Mumbai. Vamsi is responsible for all large and strategic customers in India and SAARC region. In addition to technical sales responsibilities, Vamsi is an established industry speaker in multiple events, conferences, analyst and media briefings. Vamsi was previously with Symantec, where he was the Director of Enterprise Technical Sales in India. Before moving to the technical sales organization, Vamsi was in product management for threat protection solutions in Asia Pacific Japan APJ region, where he helped establish thought leadership in the cybersecurity space. Previously, Vamsi had regional and global roles at Convergys, General Electric and Alcatel.
Hi Vamsi, welcome to our podcast series and we are excited to have you as our guest today.
Thank you Naveen and Sudhakar. It is my pleasure and honor to be part of this series.
Alright Vamsi, in most discussions, we see that security is considered as an overhead and not mainstream. As a security leader, how do you bust the myth?
In a traditional world and thinking, the answer is yes. And it surprises and scares me at the same time. In a sense, it's not just about IT. In every sphere of life, we approach it in that way. Related to something everyone goes through. When I ask my cousins or my friends why they haven't clipped in their seatbelt in the car or not worn their helmet when they're riding their bikes, the answer is police in this town don't really care about it. And that's not the fundamental thinking that we need to address. The seatbelt and helmet saves me irrespective of a cop being on the road. And it must be the same thought whether it is security or whether it is any other aspect of IT in this current world. And that's my initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, great analogy, Vamsi. Many people also carry their helmet in the back seat and they just wear when they come across cops. So interesting scenario. Now, coming to the technology, it has evolved a lot during the last 2 decades. For example, there wasn't much mobile computing and we weren't dealing with lot of data. This explosion has started happening from the last decade and so are the threats like ransomware. In your professional career spanning over 2 decades, what are the changes that you have seen in the security domain?
Great point. The world from an information and a data point, it's grown exponentially over the last 2 decades. In the initial days, it was about an infected PC, and that's what people would mostly care about. With some network controls, so if I was in a company and I was working for an organization, I would primarily worry about network controls in the perimeter in the form of a firewall or a unified threat management box like a UTM box. And that let us decide whether or not to allow connections to the internet. So things were very simple back then. It was just about keeping my PC clean and worrying about whether or not I should allow a connection to the internet. When you come to today, it's vastly different. If you look at how internet was several years ago or 2 decades ago, internet itself was via dial-up modems that offered 128 kbps speeds. Today, my phone gives me nearly 10 Mbps on a 4G connection when it's not peak time. And all that speed is just for data exchange, whether I'm watching a video, I'm kind of posting updates on my Facebook, or I'm actually carrying out some of my corporate functions. And everyone wants a piece of that data. Good guys, bad guys, friends, family, everybody is after it, right? So really today, security needs to focus on the device, the user, the applications, and the networks. And that's where it's gotten a lot more evolved and complex. And all this you have to keep in mind when you're exchanging data while all of this is happening. the paramount importance is always about keeping that data secure and protected at all times. And that determines the overall security posture from an organization perspective.
Excellent point, Vamsi. It is all about the device, the users, the applications, and the networks. To continue, from an organization standpoint, what are the various tiers or layers we need to implement the security, to ensure that end-to-end aspect of it is taken care?
Good question. Looks like you've done a lot of background research on IT security. It's actually an extension to our previous question. An effective strategy for information security always has the following aspects: visibility, control, and governance. It's always about fundamentals, right? So I'll repeat that once again: visibility, control, and governance. Visibility is about knowing what is where. Control is how do I then protect what is where. And governance is about then finally monitoring and adapting continuously. Let me break that down to actions in the form of questions when you want to devise a strategy that is effective for an organization. Who are the users? Who is going to use that information? How are they going to exchange that information? And how does that information essentially help those users? The next aspect is how do they access this data or the applications? And where are they accessing it from? Are they accessing it from an office, which is a controlled environment? Or are they accessing it from an airport where there is free Wi-Fi available? And then the third part is what data are they actually uploading or downloading? When they upload some data, when they download some data, there's always an implication from a personal or from a corporate perspective. So always being aware of who are the users, how do they access the applications, and from where are they accessing it, and what is the data that is being uploaded and downloaded. That's the visibility. It solves one part of your problem when you look at it from a three-legged stool perspective. Now, once the visibility part has been solved, we then have to plan for the control. I know who are the users, so how do I then manage the users? And that's the important aspect from a user management perspective. That's why we're typically in an organization perspective call that as identity management. Then comes the how part. And the how part is how do the users actually access to the question that I asked previously? Are they accessing it using devices such as laptops or desktops? Or are they using some of the modern devices in the form of a mobile device? And whether they're using any of these devices from the office, from their home, which is more secure Wi-Fi, or an airport or a coffee shop. And these are all things that we're thinking on from a one hand. On the other hand, the security for applications. What are the applications that they're using? Am I accessing my email? Am I accessing my enterprise resource planning tool? Am I a developer and I'm actually accessing my development environment, which is maybe in the form of a collaborative development on a Jira or an Atlassian kind of an environment? And then ultimately also about customer applications. So understanding really what is that access and what applications am I accessing is the second most important aspect. And this changes with the nature of the business. For example, if I am a bank and I'm exposing my core banking through an internet-facing consumer banking application, I have to understand how that data is being accessed. The user can potentially be accessing it from an application on their phone, going to my internet banking website, or even through a third-party website, which could be an e-commerce website and so on, right? And finally, then comes the governance part. So I spoke about two legs of the stool already, about visibility. The second part is about what are the controls that I need to put in place. And then the third part, which is essentially the governance part. And this is where compliance and regulations and policies actually come in. It could be as simple as an organization having a policy that says that you need to change your password every 90 days. Or from a government regulation, which is like the RBI regulates all the banking and financial institutions in the country, where they have to give out audit reports every 90 days. And this is then thoroughly audited by the banks, and if some cases required by interministerial departments and stuff like that. And finally, you also have the industry regulations. Now, if you have ever wondered when you go onto an e-commerce website and you see something like a PCI DSS at the bottom of it, if you never gave too much thought about what that PCI DSS means, it means that it's the payment card industry, carriers like MasterCard, Visa, more recently RuPay, and they together form a conglomerate or a consortium and then define some data security standards on how that data itself needs to be transmitted or even used or even stored. And those are some of the industry regulations that you have to keep in mind. So the visibility, the control, and the governance part together forms your overall strategy when it comes to information security.
Thank you, Vamsi. Visibility, control, and governance, the key pillars of security strategy. Moving on to authentication, Vamsi, nowadays almost all websites encourage social logins, which means that anyone can log in by using their LinkedIn, Facebook, or Google account without registering into a specific portal. While it will be very easy for the visitors to log in from the convenience perspective, do you think that this kind of practice is really safe?
Okay, great question again, Sudhakar. Switching gears and moving on to the consumer side of stuff, or how individuals interact with the internet, these are great examples of create once and use everywhere. The passwords or the user IDs, sort of like a consumer single sign-on for the consumer world. These systems by themselves are very robust and are by design very secure. No problems there. The issue is the websites where you use these social logins and you use to log in seamlessly because you just don't have to manage multiple user IDs and passwords. However, my recommendation is you have to use your judgment and read through how these individual websites or applications use the data. Are you giving them more access to your information than is required? Always very important. It is always a good idea to sign out of such websites once you're done. For example, I go to a Twitter and I use my Facebook ID or I use my Google ID when I'm in that particular session. When I'm done with Twitter on my laptop, always a good idea to sign out, right? And wherever possible, have a second factor authentication. This is to just be extra precautious. And the reason I say that is, let us assume in the worst case scenario, something like a Facebook ID or a Google ID gets compromised because that website itself did not have good data security practice in place. The second factor authentication always protects you no matter what. Even if the core user ID and password is still compromised on that website, you could just not log in by just the username and password and have potential misuse. You're always creating an additional layer of protection there, like an OTP or an app, which is like a Google Authenticator. And as you said, convenience always comes with certain risk. How do we manage this risk and how do we mitigate this risk is the most important aspect of this point.
So thank you, Vamsi. And you are advising the customers or the visitors to be vigilant about which website they are using and at the same time go through the terms and conditions. But unfortunately, many a times, these terms and conditions are written in the fine print and we overlook them. Now, coming to the individual mobile number, it has become more like a passport or Aadhaar card in India. And if you could relate that to social security number in the United States, whenever we install any application on our phone, it asks for access to contact list, camera, folders, and whatnot. From a regulatory perspective, is there any governing body which controls the application provider on data usage?
Fantastic question. And I'll also give you this. This is a tough one, right? This is very, very subjective and this varies by country. For example, the United States, UK, Australia, Europe, all of them have some sort of a regulation from a data privacy and a data regulation perspective. Over the last couple of years, you must have heard a lot around GDPR, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation that has been in force in Europe. These regulations determine how an individual's data is used and how it must be maintained by whoever is collecting that data. It's also very, very important in the fact that it gives the control to people to decide when to have their data deleted and the right to be completely forgotten online. For example, I very, very sincerely request you to go and read this up. There were a couple of examples from France and other Germany locations where somebody went to the websites and put up a request saying that delete all of my data that you have. I don't want to have an online footprint, right? And this is the right to be forgotten that I just spoke about. India is still in the draft stages of this Data Privacy Act, and we will eventually get there. It's one of the key legislations that's going to be discussed whenever the next parliament session comes up. When I chat with people today here in India in different age groups, I get different answers, and some are shocking to some outright very funny. I'll give you this. When I speak to millennials, for example, they tell me that I don't care about privacy. For them, it's all about the numbers. For example, how many people like my photo when I upload something onto Facebook? How many views do I get when I have a WhatsApp status? How many followers do I have on Instagram? How many people are actually watching my video on TikTok? For older people, the difficulty is in explaining to them the issue of privacy. India, historically, and for whatever cultural reasons, we have not been a very private society as such. We've always looked at privacy as something which is in a very, very particular manner. So there are different aspects to this. My recommendation, therefore, is each of us is the best judge and custodian of our own data. Like, I own my data and I know best how that my data impacts me. Before allowing access to our data, uploading photos anywhere or any other data, always ask yourself, is it really necessary to do so? And more importantly, what is the adverse impact of sharing such information? And then take a call whether or not you would want to upload your personal information there, and so on. Coming to the mobile number specifically, again, the same question. Is the app that I'm trying to sign up, does it necessarily need my mobile number? Or do I necessarily need that app to be productive? And then you'll have the answers to yourself whether or not you give all that information to these websites.
Thank you, Vamsi. I think you brought some interesting points. In fact, many of the visitors are not aware of how the number is going to be used. And it is essential for us to be cautious and conscious before we provide our number on any other website. And now, I'm sure our audience learned a little more about the security and its importance both from the organization and personal perspective. Quick question. If someone is interested in pursuing security as their career, what are the skills they should focus on and where should they start?
Well, essentially, as in any other domain, Sudhakar, you can get into research development or security operations or a true blue security practitioner, as I call it. For example, if you want to get into research and development, there are organizations which focus on threat research. And more importantly, these days, you see a lot of outputs in the form of threat intelligence and so on. And this is done by such R&D practitioners from a security perspective. There are also some very, very interesting job profiles which are into reverse engineering of malware. When I say malware, it is a slightly more sophisticated virus or advanced threats as we speak about. And that's a very, very good place if you're a research guy at heart. If you're more of an operational person and if that's what you've been doing and you wanted to shift into security from an operation perspective, the way to look at it is what are the tools and technologies? For example, what tools and technologies are used in managing security for the networks? Or a more regular job from a security operations perspective is called as a security operations center. Most financial and large organizations definitely have an in-house security operations center, or SOC, as the security practitioners call it. They look at the incident and event management and correlation and deployment of tools and monitoring of that. That could be another job if you're somebody who's traditionally been interested in operations in an IT world. And finally, if you're some of the true blue practitioners, as I was calling it, there are techniques, there are courses that you take specifically around offensive security, around ethical hacking and so on. And through that, gradually get into forensic analysis. And these are jobs that are very, very high in demand, very, very rewarding when it comes to a monetary perspective, but is also very, very time-bound with strict service level agreements. And this is where people such as that forensic analysts come in when you hear about an organization having been breached and their data is available on the internet. That's when these practitioners actually get called in. So all ends of the spectrum, you could go from research and development, which is the development side of the security business, to being in the forensic side, which is the true implication of security practice when it comes to the global perspective.
Excellent, Vamsi. Security center to forensic analysis to true blue security practitioner. To ensure that our listeners can explore a little bit any of these avenues or platforms that you recommend to start with.
Information security, a subset of information technology, is at the very basic level common sense. And at the fundamental level, you can understand a lot by just understanding IT systems. But going beyond, if you want to specifically get into IT security, there's a ton of learning material, a ton of different kind of certifications and learning programs, like CISSP, which is the security practitioner trainings that you can go through. There are more advanced certifications, which is like a CISSA a CISM, a CCSP, which is focused on cloud, CH, which is more around ethical hacking, and the CHFY, which is around forensics. So, however, nothing equals hands-on experience. That's what I'd like to say. It's a gradual move. Security is not something that I get a certification today and I get into a really top-notch paying job by tomorrow. Understanding of security is a very, very well drawn out career strategy. And if you want to get into it, you have to be very, very committed towards that. That's what I'd say.
Excellent. What do you recommend our young generation to focus on, to have a successful career like you?
But if there's one complaint that I have of the new age millennials, college pass outs and all of them, they're very impatient. Impatience from a learning perspective is very good. Impatience from a success perspective, I find that a little unappealing. So what I'd say is there are no shortcuts to success. You have to find an area that you're interested in and you give it your 100%. Don't worry about success from the very first day. You have to worry about efforts. Give your 100%. It's okay once you start giving your efforts if you don't like something. It's absolutely okay. And it's just fine. Decide to then identify, continue to find out what your interests are, continue to develop that interest and pursue it, and continue to give that 100%. Most importantly, you have to be very, very patient for success. Be impatient for learning, be patient for success. That's my mantra. And once you give your 100% efforts, the success is all yours. It's just a matter of time.
Excellent. There are no shortcuts to success. Vamsi, I would like to understand what you are curious about right now.
Funnily enough, Sudhakar, at the moment I'm curious about two things. The first one is how big data and cloud computing is helping build rapid models for a vaccine for COVID-19. And technology will play a big part there. And the second part is building a hobby. Over my last 2 decades of career, I haven't really spent time building a hobby. And I want to build a hobby in painting. I'm curious about abstract paintings at the moment.
That is interesting. Technology and passion as 2 points to be curious about. That's a good one, Vamsi. Vamsi, it has been an enriching conversation. Personally, I think I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience got to know about one more critical topic. From our side, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Vamsi.
So the pleasure is all mine, Sudhakar and Naveen. I really enjoyed it. Great questions, thought-provoking, and very relevant in the current world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vamsi. Dear listeners, to know more about our speakers and the content, visit or follow us on social media, or feel free to email us and we'll be happy to share further details with you. Alright, this brings us to the trivia segment of this episode. I'm sure you guys might be waiting for this. And without further ado, let me reveal it. Today's trivia is about Global Positioning System, popularly known as GPS. GPS has become one of the most common things in the world. But imagine the days when GPS was not in existence. People used to rely on landmarks or ask someone on the way for finding a location or a route. Today, GPS has made our lives easy in exploring new places through better navigation. And although GPS is free for the world to use, it costs around $2 million per day to operate, and the money comes from American tax revenue. Interesting, isn't it? Alright folks, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. So if you'd like to share any trivias, please feel free to share them through email, theguidingvoice4u@gmail.com, or you can SMS us or WhatsApp us on India number 9494587187. We will not only share the best trivias in future episodes, but we will also announce your names on this show. Again, folks, we are open for suggestions on topics that you would like to hear from us through email. Our email address is theguidingvoice4u@gmail.com. I repeat, the email address is theguidingvoice4u@gmail.com, and you may also WhatsApp us on India number 9494587187. Request you to like our page on Facebook, facebook.com/theguidingvoice4 Letter U, and follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/guiding voice, to stay tuned about future episodes. There is more in store. Until next time, have a wonderful time. Take care and be safe. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much.